throughout his life, the focus of the research of the scholar Vladimir Vajinek, whose memory is the subject of our symposium, was the missionary work of the Byzantine brothers Cyril and Methodius. Again and again, his thoughts revolved around the historical circumstances and conditions under which they tackled this great task of missioning the Slavs, and finally successfully mastered it. Excuse me for my weak voice, but yeah, it's becoming older. As is well known, the short Vita of the St. Kliment of Ochrid, which is the subject of my paper, is not one of the main sources of the Syro-Methodian mission, but recently a volume of the Greek sources on Bulgarian history, edited by Ilya Iliev, 2023, was published in this short Vita, written in Greek, has been re-edited with Bulgarian introduction and translation, because Iliev assumes that it was most likely the legal canonical Archbishop of Ochrid, Demetrios Thomatinos, who most likely wrote his short Vita during his term of office, 1216 to 1236. This, in turn, tempted me to take a closer look at Iliev's thesis, because in 2002 I published the so-called Ponimata Diaphora, the responsa expert opinions and canonical works of Chromatinos in the Corpus Fontium Historia Byzantina, volume 38. And in the introduction to my edition, they also briefly listed the other smaller works of Chromatinos, including the short Vita of Kliment of Ochrid. However, I stated that this was to be counted among the dubia, the doubtful works, because of the fact that the author of the Chromatinos, the authorship of Chromatinos was not clearly established. It should be noted in passing that Iliev's book has not yet been bibliographically recorded in the internet, although it was printed in a series of the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. A curious case in the history of science, which makes you think that I can show, makes you think. I can show the volume here, however. So I'm the first who was using this in Europe, or because I looked, I gave it in the catalog of catalogs, which is listing every catalog of the libraries in Western Europe and France, and including also the Russian main library in Moscow and so on. No result. So I wrote to Iliev, what happened? He said, they are very lazy and working there and doing nothing for propaganda groups. So I think it is an extreme case of incompetence in a certain way. And so you see, this is here. We wanted to buy it, of course, in Mainz, but until now we didn't manage to get it. So it is a question. It has a ESPN number and everything. So yeah. But before I go into my topic in more detail, St. Kliment, Clemens in Latin, should be briefly introduced. Born around 840, probably in Macedonia, and of Slavic descent, he died in 916. That's also an entrance to him, of course, in the prosopography of the Byzantinische Zeit, Middle Byzantine era, in volume 2, and in volume 1 also, because it's a person overlapping the two parts of the prosopography. He belonged to the pupils of the Holy Brothers Constantine Cyril. Constantine born 826 and died 869 in Rome. Methodius and Methodius, born circa 815 and died 885, from about 856 onwards. In the 50s, Kliment stayed with them for a long time on the Bithynian Klosterberg mountain of monasteries, Olympos, not the Olympos in western Greece, on continental Greece, but in the part of Bithynia on Asia Minor. Relatively close to Constantinople, where he may have become a monk after a certain time. Whether he also took them with him to the political motivated trip to the Crimea, that's the questions of the brothers Methodius, Constantine, and Method. When they made this trip to the Crimea, motivated by political motives to the Khazars in 860-61. This is uncertain, so we don't know if he has been in their company. But it is very likely that he was involved in the work begun in 862 at the request of Prince Rastislav of Great Moravia on the development of the Slavic alphabet in the environment of the brothers Methodius, and presumably went with them to Rome in 868, where he was ordained a priest together with other students of the brothers, and took part in the funeral of Constantine Cyril in February 868. The pupils, who subsequently returned to Moravia with Method, including Kliment, had to soon after the death of Methodius, 865, he fled at the country due to the hostility from the Latin clergy and under pressure from Prince Satu. So he was in this group of the refugees from Great Moravia. At the Danube border near Belgrade, they reached Bulgarian territory and were warmly received by the Bulgarian Prince Boris, 852 to 889, who had already accepted baptism for himself and his people by Byzantine clergymen in 864 or 865. We know this from a Proto-Bulgarian inscription or Bulgarian Greek inscription, which is included in the collection of the Proto-Bulgarian inscriptions edited by Vesheviev. And it will be talked later on also on this inscription, which was found in Albania, today Albania. Boris assigned Kliment the settlement Kutmichnica, later the settlement and later another settlement, Rembica or Velica, perhaps the later city of Titov Velis, as a bishop's seat. Kliment significantly promoted Christian culture for the future spread and consolidation of Christianity through the translations of church books persuaded the ruler Boris to build 7 cathedral buildings and built the Panteleimon monastery in Lichnidos, Ochrid. Also actively supported under the Prince Tsar Simeon, 893 and to 927, Kliment continued to work until the end of his life. The main source for his life and work is the Greek detailed Vita of Saint Kliment, written by the Byzantine Archbishop Theophylactos of Ochrid. He died about 1026. And this was the very famous predecessor of the Bishop Dimitrios Pamatinos. His work is also published in the GB, in the Histories of Bulgarska Historia, volume 9 by and also in the book of Milev with the 2 Vitas, Vitae of Kliment of Ochrid, which was first published in 1966. Now I will speak first of the task which had Iliev to perform when he the task which has everybody to perform before publishing a new edition. But as we know, the edition of Iliev is no new edition, but only a re-impression of one of perhaps a mixture of the already edited editions of Saint Kliment. And so we have to look, if we are discussing who is the author of the Vita of Kliment, which was the basis of this of all the editions of the Vita. And we see there are nearly 4 manuscripts, but the first manuscript is or the oldest manuscript may have been written in 13th to 14th century and was found by Grigorovich in Ochrid, then brought to Russia, and is now preserved in the Moscow, in the Russian main library, Lenin Library in Moscow. It was printed in Moscopolis, 1746. Then there is another manuscript which was published by Schaffrack with the help also of George Curtius in Prague and published in 1853. And then there's a further manuscript from the Protaton monastery on Mount Athos. And this was read and printed and edited by Ivan Duychev, 1944, and repeatedly in 1966 and 1981. So if anybody tries to edit a new text of the Vita, of the short Vita of Kliment, then I should think the first task would be to try to get to see these to take a closer look at these manuscripts, it may be difficult today and or even impossible at present to perform this task, but it would be necessary. And it is a pity that Iliev couldn't or could not do this. But before we discuss the question if maybe possibly Ometinos has been the author of this Kratko-Žitvi, we have to look at the text more closely. What are the main traits of the style, and is it compatible to the other text which has been written by Ometinos? And I think this would have been the first task then, to look at the style of both texts and of certain individual parts of the text, which could be conclusive for the question of the authorship. So the short Vita is really much shorter than the detailed life, and but it's offering some interesting and historical interesting information which are of course important for the history of the mission of Kliment, or of the work of Kliment of Ochrid. And one of this if we take a closer look at the first chapter, we read that Utos Klimes Mengenos Helken to European Mission. I will not read the text. You see it here. This text is interesting because he's given some information about the region of the settlement of the Misoi of the Bulgarians, because Misos is another expression name for the Bulgarians. And here's said that they has settled, or they were to be found in the North Oceanum, the Northern Ocean, and and also near the Nekran Thalassa. So this region, which was under because they were by Alexander, of course, Alexander the Great. They were resettled or dispersed by the power of Alexander the Great. Meta des Sichnon Chronon Paradromin Vinami Valia ton Istron Periorthenton. Also sie haben dann later the Danube crossed, and then they settled in Pannonia and in Macedonia and in Thessalia. So I look then, of course, in the literature about the history of Alexander the Great, because this small part here about the consequences of the power of Alexander the Great and his actions in Palestine, because here the Dead Sea is mentioned. I looked then in the literature, has somebody done any research on this question? I found nothing. So, and of course, it was a bit under pressure that I looked for this, for the historical background of this chapter here. And I looked through Pseudo-Callisthenes and other historical sources on Alexander the Great and his tradition. And the problem is that this combination of actions of Alexander between the Dead Sea, when he has been, of course, I found that he was in Jerusalem and so on, but nowhere I have found the trace of the deeds of Alexander the Great in connection with Bulgarians or Mysians and so from this region. So this, I think, maybe that we have to look in the Serbian tradition of the history of Alexander the Great, like there were edition one book by Mönch, colleague in Hamburg, who worked about the tradition of one of the traditions of Alexander the Great and other texts. But it was in vain that I looked in this book. I couldn't look in the special edition on the Serbian Alexander tradition. But I think we have to look everything to look in any sort, because in order to find a place or a sentence where it is talked about the Nekar Thalassa in Palestine in connection with the Mesoid. So maybe nothing we will find. And also, of course, in any work of Martinos until now, there was nothing said about this. So this special passage here, including the Istos then, is speaking perhaps against the authorship of Martinos. For example, he never used the word Istos for the Danube because he said Danubius. So if Iliev would have looked into the register of Martinos on Istos, he wouldn't have found anything but one or two chapters in which is talked about the Bulgarians from the city of Veria, today Veria in central Greece, which were settled by Bulgarian occupation from Veria to the region of the Danube. And then he talked about some things which were ordered by the Bulgarian Tsar or king, and so that he had to talk about some property cases in this connection, because Martinos was a great jurist and all his decisions went about questions of property and heritage problems and so on. So this is typical, but it has nothing to do with this chapter one here, the Bulgarian and Mysian tradition. Then there is another text in chapter 6, for example. There he is talking of the diatriba, of the time which has been, in which Kliment of Ochrid had worked in Lychniddos, Illyrian, the Illyrian city. Lychniddos is, of course, as is said here, also from that Lychniddos is today Achris. And Achris is, he says, Kataton Mison onomazete glossan, that Achris is the name of Lychniddos in the language of the Bulgarians, which are called again here Misoi. But Chromatinos never thinks about the origin of the name of Achris. If this is an expression of Bulgarian, but he always is mentioning Achris very often, and of course that it is a Greek word, and so he never says anything about the origin of the name. So also this is another evidence, I think, against the authorship of Chromatinos for this chapter in the Vita of Kliment. The only sentence in which Chromatinos is speaking of Misos is a proverb in Greek about the distance of when any person is coming from a settlement very far away from the settlement from which, for example, another person is coming, and they say metaxi mison kefrigon. Also, the distance is so great that even greater than the distance between Phrygi, the Phrygians, and the Bulgarians, the Misoi. So this is in the collection of Greek Byzantine proverbs. Twice is using Chromatinos this expression, and of course, I think this shows that the Mysi in connection with the Bulgarians do not play any role. There's I have forgotten to mark the name Glavinica, which you read here also. Not only Lychniddos belongs, Lychniddos and Achris belong to the circle of polis, of cities of the Illyrian polis, but also the city of Kefalonia, met onomasisa, die Vulgaron phoni Glavinica. Excuse me for not having written the Iota subscriptum, but it was difficult to put in the moment when I wrote this, put this in the PPT format. But for us, it's important that Chromatinos knows knowing only the name Glavinica for the city of which for one of the bishoprics in his autocephalous archbishopric of Ochrid, which had about 15 seats of suffragan bishoprics. So Chromatinos is mentioning Glavinica in the Ponema 147, chapter 147, because he has written letter to the abbot to the catechumenos of the monastery of Dimitrios monastery in Glavinica. So, but he says nothing about the other name, Kephalinia, and it has also, you could have thought about perhaps that the name Kephalinia, if he knew it, is of course also the name of the island Kefalonia in the Ionian Sea. But this is also, it is clearly here Glavinica meant. And of course, this is right that Glavinica is the meaning in Greek or in Slavic, the Slavic Greek word, the same as Kephalinia in Greek. So the Vita is right to say that Kefalania means in the Bulgarian Glavinica, but for Chromatenos must have been Glavinica just the name of one of his bishoprics, and maybe that one of his clerics, of his colleagues in his administrative in the group of other clerics working with him in the administration of the Archbishopric of Ohrid, that one of them was perhaps also of Slavic origin. So then there is, we can imagine many possibilities that he got information about the history and so on. But this, from this chapter 147, there's nothing to see that it is of any interest for Chromatenos if Glavinica may have been the same as Kephalinia. So I think this is also of importance. Oh, excuse me. Here's another last quote from chapter 9 of the Vita brevis, that he, and this is the information that in this settlement, Kephalinia, one can see until now stelas lithinas, so columns of stone in which are engraved grammata, which are talking about the baptism of the ethnos, maybe of course, of the Bulgarian Macedonian ethnos, and this is the same information which I mentioned before, that we have that there is, has been found a Bulgarian inscription in the Albanian city of Balj, and this Balj maybe could be perhaps also identified with this Glavinica. Glavinica, this is also the meaning, I think, of Muselier, who wrote about the medieval history of Albania, and I think this is very interesting that the Vita, the author of the Vita, knows about this detail of a column of stone with an inscription which is reporting the event of the Christianization, the baptism of the converting a certain population with Christendom. In fact, it was Boris, the king of Bulgaria, or the archon, the prince of first, prince of Bulgaria in this time, who was the first Christianized prince, whom I had mentioned before. And the inscription of Balch is also reporting the date and important is that this inscription of Balch is mentioning Boris and his baptism in the year 865 or 64, and that this inscription, this chapter in the Vita, is talking. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So, this is perhaps a sign that the author of the Vita may be connected in a certain way with people or with a special region of Catalonia and of the southern Albania, which was then part of the Archbishopric of Oslo. So now we can come to chapter 11. And this is a text here, which is a bit complicated and which is a sign that also of a certain central importance for the question of the authorship. But here I am trying to bring a philological solution for until now unsolved question of research about this Vita brevis, because without the word Tom, which I inserted here, we read that the archon of all the people, Boris, who was the Pangelesias, Anakanisas, that means the baptism. I think Michael and met, and after him also the son, Kliment, who was the first the first Tsar, or the first king, or the first emperor, acclaimed of the Bulgarians. And he was just the person who made them to Christians. But as it is, this sentence here, without the insertion of the tone, is producing a historical mistake, because it said that it was the archon of the archon Boris who was baptized, and after this person, his son Michael, because the brackets here I inserted, and you must read them without the brackets. And then it turns out that the son is called Michael, but we know that Boris took the name Michael through baptism. So this was his Christian name, was Michael. And now if we see here that Oskai Protos Vasilevs an Geräute, Michael, if Michael is Boris, as I would like to interpret this text by inserting and by editing this poem, then I read Don Diakon of all them, Boris, who namely the person who is so the Palingenesia, so the baptism, Michael, and after him his son. You see, it's complicated. If it's meant really Michael to be this identical with Boris, as I think we must assume, then it is historically not correct that he was the person who was acclaimed as first Bulgarian king, because this is normally Simeon, who was Anegoite Vasilevs, namely 914 in this years. So, but I think perhaps it is right, as I did, to add this tone, which by the brackets is identifying the person Boris with the Michael. Because we have in the so-called Ducange list of the archbishops of Ochrid mention information talking also about Boris in the context of this list of archbishops, the information that Boris was proclaimed Vasilevs, and he's named there Vasilevs. So this is connecting this chapter with the list of archbishops of Ochrid, which was produced in the later Middle Ages, about named in the 12th century. So I think this I have just found out today by reading the small book by Bozhilov about this special list of Ducange, which must be have written in the 12th or 13th, 14th century. But it is perhaps not easily to date. The last word to the Mysians once more. The Mysians are also meant in an inscription, a brick inscription at the Hagia Sophia Cathedral at Ochrid. And this inscription was put in there, or is a work by the Archbishop Grigori. And Gregorius was functioning about 1314. And this inscription is clearly identified. And there's talk about that Moses Gregorius has this skini, this tent in English, this tent, and he taught the Messians full of wisdom about the by God written that's law. Law. The law in the year 1313, 1340. So the great teacher Moses Gregorius had the Messians taught full of wisdom, God's law, and so on. Ethni tak mison, ek didaski, Prinzing, this Gregorius, and the name. So, and again, another archbishop who's talking of the Messians, other than Chomatinos. So I think this is perhaps sufficient evidence that my colleague Ilya Iliev is perhaps wrong with his idea that Chomatinos must be the author. I like Chomatinos very much, but I think I can't save him in this respect. Thank you very much for